Okay. So I suppose, roughly speaking, you know what's going to go on, don't you? Roughly speaking, you've got an idea what's going to happen? No? Oh, I see. Okay. Well, it's basically a retreat, which means I'm going to be talking about Buddhism. We're going to do some meditations. We're going to do some prayers. We've got some books coming tomorrow morning. We couldn't get them quite finished. So we'll have a book of teachings, a bunch of all the different Buddhist teachings, and we'll have a book of prayers and things, lots of prayers. And that prayer book, we started it in 2001 when we did our first pilgrimage. Like I mentioned, it was to raise money for the prison project when we first met Amber. And that was a bunch of just all these, and it was all from prayers and advice that Lama Zopa gave me when I rang him, when he rang me and I told him about the pilgrimage. He spent a couple of hours on the phone giving advice about which practices to do at which place, you know, because he always talked about how pilgrimage, you know, instead of just being like tourists, and the same here actually, instead of just feeling like a tourist, you feel like you're doing something more worthwhile. So for example, you know, and even though many people who come on the pilgrimage, as well as this, aren't Buddhist, but somehow you don't have to come to all the teachings. I mean, when we're up in Lawudo, it'll be at least 5 days. What is it, 5 or 6? 5 days. 5 days. You know, all day we're going to be morning prayers and meditation, then we'll have teachings, then we'll have lunch, then we'll have a break, then we'll have more teachings, and then something in the evening, you know. So it's going to be intense, as well as having thin air and 10 below freezing. Not much walking up there, but there's a bit. If you room up a bit, like you hyperventilate a bit when you walk up the steps. But it's a Buddhist retreat. That's what it is. So it's having fun. People certainly have fun, thoroughly enjoying themselves. But this is what I've found. Even though people who've been Buddhists come on the pilgrimages and to this, they listen if they want it. They don't have to come to everything, you know. But people all say they feel that even just, you know, doing these extra things makes you feel like you're doing more than being a tourist. And there's nothing wrong with being a tourist. But somehow people feel there's some kind of thing that gives it cohesion. I mean, over the years of the pilgrimages, my experience with groups, every year people are very moved by the experience, bond really well together. I mean, people who've been on the pilgrimage, you found that, don't you? You haven't you? You found that. Like Donna, you saw it. Isn't it unbelievable? People really become close to each other. I remember one tour guide we had in India, one woman just for one group in one section of India. She said she was very amazed by the harmony in the group. She said usually groups, within 3 days, you've got all these cliques, you know, people gossip. Everybody's always been very touched by that. People have special meditations, they have special dreams. Even if you're not Buddhist, people seem to really, there's something about doing more than merely, you know, being a tourist. It seems to touch people. That's been my experience. So let's see what it is for you. But the thing is, we're going to be talking lots about Buddhism. That's the point. Not the point, but that's what we're going to be doing, the whole Buddhist deal. And it's up to you whether you want to come to all the classes. You don't have to. You can relax up at Lawudo. Some people didn't come to everything, you know. They came in, they just hung around and relaxed, did their own thing. That's completely fine. There's no compulsion that you must come. That's really, and that's what I want to say is so important. You know, find the way to find your own space in the trek. And if you're not particularly wanting all the Buddhist part, then you don't take the Buddhist part, but enjoy it for what it is. You know, find your own place in it. There's no reason you have to come to everything if you don't want. Do you understand? That's really important to say that. And then take what you can from it. So it's going to be teachings, lots of discussion with each other in little groups sometimes. We'll do meditations. That's how it'll be up in Lawudo, and then on the way up, you know, it'll be walking half the time, and then in the evenings we'll have a bit of teachings, a bit of meditation, a bit of relax and discussion and things on each of the evenings. So here tomorrow, I mean, you haven't got that much time in Kathmandu really. We've got one day at the end in Kathmandu, haven't we? Yeah, so I mean, we can just do something tomorrow morning, but if people want to go down, well, some of you thinking you want to go down tomorrow to places, or you want to hang out up here? And did any of you have any thoughts about any of that? Because I mean, we can have a meditation in the morning, we can have something maybe in the afternoon, and then something in the evening. It's up to really what you guys want, because it's going to be pretty intense from there on. Tomorrow can be like a relaxing day. So did you have the feeling you wanted to go down and, not excavate, what's the word? Explore, thank you, excavate. Don't you excavate Kathmandu? Yes.
I'd love to go down to
the nunnery. Good idea, yeah, that's a really nice idea. So people can Christina can organise that, can't you? Organise where the nuns, Huh?
Maybe the animal liberation.
Where's that?
The animal land, the goats. It's half an hour walk from here.
Okay, well, people know about that? What is that? It's a place where Lama Zopa started, cause one of the practices among Buddhists is to save animals, and Lama Zopa's a real fan of that. So every time he meets a goat, he's buying the goat to save it, you know. Chickens, goats, you name it, he'll grab it. So there's this place where he's bought a piece of land, I think, where they put where they get the goats, where they save the goats. They have a home now. So there's things you could do tomorrow. I just think we have maybe a morning meditation. Yeah, something like that. Then have your breakfast. And then go hang out and just investigate certain things, but make it, down to the nuns, certainly down to Boda. I mean, if you want to go down to Boda. And the last day, how much time do we have? We come in the evening. What time do we arrive?
We arrive in the afternoon.
And then we have one night. And then we have one night.
Then we have 2 nights.
2 nights. Oh, we'll have lots of time at the end. And because we'll be blissing out after being in 10 below in freezing places, we'll be blissing out of the Hyatt. You'll be so excited and so happy, I tell you. Have big meals, beautiful food, a lovely swimming pool and big hot baths. You'll be so excited. And then you can go around maybe Boda and Kathmandu then. Just do a bit tomorrow. Maybe go to the animals, go to the nuns. Because the nuns are amazing. I think they're beating the monks by now. So many nuns. The nunnery this place started maybe let's tell you about this place. It might do. Tonight, shall we? Yeah, good. This place began with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa in about 1971. Lama Yeshe is Tibetan, Lama Zopa was a Sherpa, and they met when they'd both been in Tibet, they both escaped, and they were at this place in North India where all the monks and the lamas were until they started to decide what to do with their lives after they escaped from Tibet, In 1959 they met then, and then Lama Yeshe became kind of Lama Zopa's teachers. Lama Zopa was 14 at the time, and Lama Yeshe became his main teacher. So they, at some point when Lama Zopa had TB, a couple of years later, they were in the mid-60s, they were in Darjeeling to get some fresh air, because Rinpoche's TB, it was very common for the Tibetans to get TB, they still do. Then they met their first Western student who became a nun, and then this is sort of mid-60s, late 60s, and they came down to Boda, because that's where all the Tibetans gathered in Boda. It was a very special place for Tibetans after they came out of Tibet, if they came to Nepal, So this woman, she was a European, Lama Yeshe always called her a Russian princess. She was more really like a Ukrainian aristocrat, but Lama preferred Russian princess. Her name was Zina, So she was very kind of this arrogant kind of princess, always called her a princess. So she'd have her Hollywood friends come and then she'd bring out her 2 toy boy lamas, Because at the time, back in the mid-60s, early 70s, Westerners conflated enlightenment and drugs. I don't know why, it was so weird. Maybe because Tibetans wear earrings, the men wear earrings and long hair. We thought they were all hippies. But in fact, they're the most conservative people. So anyway, more and more Westerners started meeting the lamas, and then this place became somehow the king's astrologer used to live up here. If you've been to those 2 big stupas, have you been to those 2 big stupas yet? In the garden, go there tomorrow, you'll see. And just there's one little house, a Hindu temple. That was about the only building that's left now. And he used to live up here, the king's astrologer. So they somehow managed to buy it or whatever from him. And then and then Westerners started coming more and more to Kathmandu. Then they had their first course here. There was 1 building for about 15 people. And then within a year, already 200 people were coming. They have a big tent. And that's when this tradition in this place of having these massive courses, every November there'd be big courses and hundreds of people from the West. This is one of the main places really since the 60s and 70s where Western people met Buddhism. And then as a result of that, the students of those lamas then went back to their own countries and started centers. And so now in this organization, there's 160, 170 different centers, activities, as a result of students coming here first. And that's how some of us met the lamas here, same. So Lama Zopa was a Sherpa. So he left when he was little boys in Tibet when all the business happened. So he escaped to Tibet, back to India. And then when he was about 1971, he went back up to the mountains, where we're going tomorrow, where we're going to Lawudo, where his cave was from his past life. So he went back up there and he was given back the cave formally, and then he started to teach. And then at some point, all the boys, because in his past life, he promised his past life, the Lawudo Lama. The cave is called, you'll see it, it's called the Lawudo Cave. And Lawudo means radishes or onions. I never know which one. Have you, Katie, have you heard what it is? You know it's radishes. You've checked. Are you confident?
Yeah, it's also in the book Lawudo Lama.
It says it, radishes. Okay, basically in the last life, this layman, Kunsang Yeshe, he was a layman. He was a yogi, a practitioner, and then like a lot of these guys, he decided that towards the last part of his life, just to to leave the family and go into a cave. Well, it seems like he moved the radishes out. He chucked the radishes out and moved in, basically, a little hole in the wall, and that's the cave. You'll see it. So he then took back his cave, and then in his past life, apparently, the local people asked him if he'd start a monastery for the children, for the boys, which meant the boys, of course. The girls didn't have. And so he said he was too old, but he promised he'd do it in his next life. So when Lama Zopa went up there in 71, he then fulfilled his promise. And so about 30 of the local monks then started in Lama Yeshe, called it the Mount Everest Centre. And then they'd come down here in the winter to Kopan, which is now doing regular courses for Westerners. And so soon it became a monastery for about 30 monks. And some of the monks still are here, the ones who first began. And then eventually they stayed here full time. And then it's grown now from 30 monks to at least 500, I think. I forget. And in 1979, Lama Yeshe, being very, 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 very kind of unnormal, not like normal Tibetan, very radical, really kind of tuned into the West, And he could see that so many people, more than half the students were women. He could see the way it was in the West with women studying just like men and all sorts of things and being part of the world, unlike in Tibet, which was very male. So he got one of his nuns to start studying here with the monks, and then he got her to start the nunnery down the road. So she bought about 50 different individual bits of land and put it all together, and since then this monastery for nuns has been really flourishing. I think there's about 350 nuns down there now, and they study all the way exactly the same philosophical studies as the monks. They become geshes, and that's because of Lama Yeshe. It's really amazing, very far-seeing, And also over the years, you can see with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa both, the way they have many female students, Western students, and they treat them just the same. If you're good at a certain job, you'll get the job. Male or female. Many of his students are female who are teachers. Many people with positions of authority are female, which is not very untypical for Tibet. It was very patriarchal, So that's how this place developed, and it keeps kind of growing. It's like a little city up here, It's just bursting with life. New places. It got destroyed. That place you're seeing being built just down there. Yeah, down there. That was collapsed in the earthquake, so they're rebuilding, but it's growing like crazy, and it somehow works very beautifully to be this dual facility of foreigners coming all year round. Thousands of foreigners come to all these courses every month over the years. Somehow the monks manage to live their life, to live a proper monastic life, and all the foreigners coming. It seems to work very well. It's very surprising, and more people are staying down with the nuns as well. So it'd be really nice to go down and see them. That's it. My history. Brief history. So we do, I don't know, shall I talk about something tonight? Shall I say something about Buddhism? Okay. I'll just say something brief. Okay. Well, this is Tibetan Buddhism. Look at it. Leaves the Catholics for dead, I tell you. Look at them, unbelievable. So, I met these lamas first in Australia, actually, in 1976 at Chenrezig Institute. It's funny, I had lunch with Lama Zopa today, and it's a very rare occasion, I promise. I'm not showing off or anything. But he asked me, tell me about how you became a Buddhist. I didn't know what to tell him, He kept waiting me to tell a story. I couldn't think of anything to tell him, how I became a Buddhist. So never mind, but how I became a Buddhist, I was brought up a Catholic. And I was in love with God, always in love with God. I was the naughtiest girl in the whole school, but always in love with God. But never thought of God as my creator, which is very interesting. I never worried about that. Anyway, by the time I was 19, it was sort of time for goodbye God, hello boys. I tried to be a nun when I was 12, but my mother wouldn't let me. I was crying like a baby. Anyway, then 10 years later, went through all this whole process, looking for a way to see the world, I think. That was very clear for me, And then I bumped into these lamas in Chenrezig Institute. That was the one story I told Lama Zopa today when he had to become a Buddhist. I said, well, I was doing karate, totally fanatic about my karate, 6 days a week. Nothing would have taken me away from it. And then some kind gentleman called Bill Bright ran over my foot and broke it. Snapped in East Melbourne, fell on the ground. I thought, no, I can't do my karate. I was devastated. So then I was sitting in a restaurant feeling very sorry for myself in Carlton, Shakahari, still there. Now it's a fancy vegan restaurant. It was cheaper then, in Lygon Street. And I saw this poster that said Lama Yeshe. Well, that was it. That hooked me. That was what got me there. So I always joke and say this fellow called Bill Bright was really Lama Yeshe running over my foot, sort of stopping me in my tracks, because I was going in the wrong direction. So they went up to Chen Raising Institute. I told that Lama Zopa today. And then I met Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, and here I am. That's it. That's how I became a Buddhist. Anyway, okay, so why am I a Buddhist? What is it about, what I like about Buddhism? Well, I love God, you know, but I never thought of him as my creator. I'm not being rude to anybody if you have faith in a creator. I never thought of him as the boss. I just loved God. I used to love the idea of God being everywhere, and I used to think about this all the time. I didn't talk about it. I assumed everybody thought about it, but I didn't talk about it. No one asked me. But so somehow I would want to understand the way things were, why things were the way they were, you know. So for me, when I came along to Buddhism, it was a bit of a shock initially. But I remember what I found immensely appealing was the idea of no creator. Some of that sat very comfortably for me. And then when I heard about karma, that was a bit of a shock. But karma and reincarnation, which of course is an absolutely fundamental part of the big Buddhist worldview. And that's, I think, sometimes might be a surprise to us that we don't realize that Buddhism is a vast worldview. I mean, India, I always talk about this lately, these days. I remember it was the Dalai Lama who said, I heard it a couple of years ago, read somewhere. He said it was these amazing Indians, more than 3,000 years ago, who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self, you know. Well, I often joke about us people in the West, white people, you know, Christian, Jewish people. We go back to the Greeks. We love the Greeks, right? Half our fancy words are in Greek. What do we know about India? Absolutely zero, you know, nothing. But there's been an astonishing system for thousands of years. Amazing, sophisticated practitioners, incredible, brilliant thinkers, philosophers, meditators, but we're utterly ignorant of that in our Christian Jewish world. I mean, I suppose it's inevitable. So when you really realize where Buddha came out of, this amazing being went through this extraordinary system, they're the ones who created this brilliant psychological skill that the world knows as mindfulness meditation, which is way more brilliant than we can imagine, and we're going to be talking about this. It's absolutely ingenious skill that these amazing great meditators and yogis and thinkers and philosophers created that enables a person, this is the unique thing, and this is the tool that Buddha took with him when he diverged in his own direction from the Hindus, in particular in relation to his own findings about the nature of self. This skill enables you to totally focus the mind to degrees of subtlety that we don't even posit as existing in our culture. And this is something really vital to understand if we want to understand Buddhism. Of course, we're going to go into this. And then, because Buddha's not a creator, therefore, you know, the information that we're getting here doesn't come from on high. It's coming from the experience of a person called the Buddha and anybody since him who's done the same job. You know, I remember, I notice in the world we all ask the same questions. I always quote this. But I remember in New Zealand, years ago, a scientist, in fact, asked me the question. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? And he was really shocked when I said, well, would you ask Einstein, who revealed relativity to him? No, you wouldn't. You know, he used his own noggin, he observed the universe, and he came to his own findings. He didn't ask us to believe it. He's not making it up. It didn't come from on high. It's not revelation. I said, that's exactly the Buddha. But we find that so shocking because the Buddha talks about past lives and reincarnation and karma, and we have this assumption that that can't be cognized, that can't be known. But the Buddha's view of the mind tells us it can be, because these great Hindus before him accessed these subtle levels of their own consciousness. And the key job of being a Buddhist, which is what he got from these Hindus, is to unpack and unravel and to become intimately familiar with the contents of our own mind so that we can radically change it and turn it into the mind of a Buddha. So the word Buddha tells us what the job is of being a Buddhist, basically. The end result, as far as Buddha is concerned, every mind, every consciousness, every person possesses just naturally the potential to become a Buddha. In Tibetan, the word Sangye, and the etymology is very tasty. Sang implies the utter eradication from one's own mind, Tibetans always point here, of all ego, all fears, all neurosis, all depression, anxiety, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem, the stuff that in our culture we assume is completely normal. So normal, you'd be weird if you didn't have it. So it's curious to hear the way Buddha says this, you know, that this stuff, he says, is not at the core of our being, and using these amazing techniques and the understanding in Buddhism about the mind and how it functions, our job is to unpack and unravel the contents of our own being in a very sophisticated, clear, focused way. In order to rid the mind of all the rubbish, Sangye, Buddha, Sangye, Ge implies also the development to perfection of all the goodness within us. Love, compassion, wisdom. For the Buddha, that stuff's at the core of our being, and this other stuff is a load of rubbish and we can get rid of it. That's pretty unusual. That's not the way we think about the mind in our modern culture, that's for sure. And because of that, it's hard to hear this stuff. And you're going to see from our discussions, you know, it's hard to take this as a view, because we can't even conceive of a person. They would seem weird to us. No fears, no anger, no jealousy, with a mind that's really powerful, that sees the minds of others. This just sounds like mystical to us, you know. But for the Buddha, this is a doable job, and everybody has the potential. So the essence of it is that Buddha's this regular guy back then who came out of this amazing system, went as far as he could go and then diverged in his own direction, in particular in relation to his own findings about the self. And then basically presents his methodology. He says, this is what I've done, this is what I've accomplished, this is what I see to be true, over to you, baby. If you want to become this, you follow the steps, just like you would Einstein or anybody else. That's the approach. And I didn't understand it all in the beginning, of course not. I remember hearing Lama Zopa teach for 1 month in this very arcane, medieval kind of constructs, because Tibet was very isolated in a way that was excellent, because it kept it very alive, very pure. I didn't have a clue what he was talking about for 1 month, you know. It was very strange. But Lama Yeshe somehow managed to talk like a Western. He was very modern and psychological. It was very fascinating, the difference, you know. So anyway, I stuck around. I felt there was something there. So for me, the thing that really was interesting for me was the view of karma, and the idea that my consciousness was not the handiwork of a creator, nor of a parents. And this is what Buddha's view is. It's quite shocking, really, for us. I mean, if you're a Christian, God made you, you know. And if you're a materialist, your mummy made you. But not for the Buddha. They gave us a body, but not a mind. Because for the Buddha, and this is a fundamental point that we'll talk about, that we have to take as a hypothesis, you can't prove it immediately, is that your mind, your consciousness, she's get caught all the time, you see. Does it? It's okay. All right. So you know, our mind, our consciousness is not physical. It is not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. It is not the handiwork of a creator. So this is really intense in Buddhism. Our mind is our own, and our job is to know it intimately, using these brilliant skills so we can unpack and unravel it and change it. We're not talking about the brain here, we're talking about a cognitive process, you know. That's the real skill of being a Buddhist. And that's expertise, that's Buddha's expertise, I'd say. That's the way of putting it. So this all sounds very exciting, but then where do you think, where's all this stuff fit in? All this weird stuff and holy pictures and prostrations and bald heads and... We'll discuss that as time goes by. Okay? That'll do. Any questions before we can wander off for a relaxing evening? Any questions? Just to start, any questions at all? Don't have to have. All right then. Let's do a little meditation so we can... What is it? 8 o'clock? 8:30? What's the time? Only 8? Oh. I mean, relax tonight, it's okay. No, the cafe's not open, you can't go and have a beer. They don't sell beers, I don't think, at the cafe. I don't think there's any beers down there. Is there any cafes down the road for beers? No. There are? Yeah. Are there?
Yeah, there are. I don't know if they sell beer though. Never been to.
Around for... Okay, anyway, you don't want a beer. You can have a... whatever. Okay. So let's just talk about briefly then this skill, this brilliant skill these amazing Hindus invented thousands of years ago, that the Buddha took with him when he diverged into his own direction, calling it Buddhism. It's one of the central meditation techniques. It's the one that the world vaguely knows as mindfulness. And sometimes people think that's all what being a Buddhist is, you know, close your eyes and watch your breath and be mindful. Well, it's a bit sort of ridiculous. In fact, as I'm saying, which is often surprising to us, it's a world view. It's a whole view about the universe, how it is, what it is, where it comes from, who we are, what is happiness, what is suffering, and how to achieve this perfection that Buddha says is the natural potential of all of us. So meditation is, okay, given that right now the Buddha is saying that in our mind, this consciousness of ours, he divides the contents. It's a very different model, a very different way of seeing the world. The words, you're going to see the words are very familiar, but the way he constructs, the way he observes how this human mind of ours works is very fascinating. He basically says this mental consciousness of ours, all our thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum, you know, of our inner being. Like I'm saying, really, I'm not joking when I say it's Buddha's expertise. You mightn't like his expertise, but you absolutely have to say the mind is Buddha's expertise. The literature on it is vast. So the Buddha's saying basically that our mind, we can divide all the contents into 3 categories of states of mind. The neurotic, ridiculous, ego-based, fear-based, they're all fear-based, he says, ridiculous, unhappy, deluded, ridiculous states of mind. And we know them well. Attachment, anger, fears, jealousy, depression, simple words, you know. Then you've got virtuous, positive, constructive, beneficial, useful states of mind. Love, wisdom, compassion, intelligence, etc., etc. Now already, as I've implied, this is the meaning of the word, Sangye, Buddha, implies the eradication of the first lot and the development to perfection of the second lot. That's the particular approach in Buddhism, which is not how we think in our world. Like I'm saying, the words are simple, but it's such an unusual view. There's no psychology in our world that would suggest you can get rid of all anger, all fears, all jealousy. Like I said, you actually would think you're weird if you were like that. We give equal status to this stuff, don't we? So the words are simple, but to really get our head around how this is so, it takes a while to get used to it, I tell you. But that's the essence, the basis of all of Buddhist practice. If the end result is to be rid of all the rubbish and full of the goodness, clearly that's the job to be done, isn't it? It implies the job of being a Buddhist, being our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it, you know. So you can say that all the other jobs we do as a Buddhist, which include all these things that look like rituals and look like religious, and we'll discuss all these, they're tools that you choose to use, if they suit you, that would enable you, would help you and kind of enable you to get to become familiar with the contents of your mind. Because the words sound simple, but because the Buddha would say we're born into this life programmed with so much junk from many lifetimes, I mean, talk about unconscious, talk about habits. It's not that it is a doable job, but don't hold your breath. This stuff goes really deep, really instinctive, and so many of the old habits we have are so instinctive, so ingrained, that we don't even recognize them. So this is why we have to have, in the long term, to do the job that he says we have to do, this skill that they know, that's called, known as mindfulness broadly, but it's not really an accurate term for it. It's actually really called, it's a technique of developing incredibly focused, subtle concentration. The word in Sanskrit is samadhi. We need to develop in the long term this particular technical skill, this psychological skill that enables you to access these more subtle levels of your mind, it's like the microscope of your mind, where you're super focused, super sharp, and this is the surprising part, where you're completely beyond the conceptual and beyond the sensory. Now that doesn't even exist in our modern psychology. That's why it seems so weird to us, and therefore it's a bit mystical and religious. But this is a doable, practical, grounded thing, you know. People right now of our culture, Western people, white people, all kinds of people, not just Asians, are in the mountains or in places doing this technique right now, accomplishing concentration. And just alone, the result of this is so astonishing, it sounds like science fiction in our world. So the Buddha's view of the mind is so radically different. Radically different in terms of its potential, radically different in terms of the way he describes the contents, and then radically different in terms of the subtlety of this capacity for cognition of ours called our mind, you know. So in that sense, it's very, very different. He's not discussing the brain. He doesn't argue that we've got a brain. That's evident, we have a brain. But you ask these dudes way back then where their brain was, they wouldn't have a clue. They're discussing the internal process itself. And we don't talk like that in our culture, you know. So he divides all the contents into these neurotic and deluded and virtuous and positive states of mind. The job of being a Buddhist, it's like implied by the end result, is to recognize the rubbish, slowly change it, reconfigure, and grow the goodness. I mean, it's as simple but as difficult as that. So the third category of states of mind, I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. These are states of mind that whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need them to be effective. They're called concentration, good memory, awareness, attention, many words in there, you know, and they're like the parts of our mind that make us function day to day, whatever we do. But they're not virtuous or non-virtuous in their nature. And those characteristics, virtuous and non-virtuous, we don't like to talk like that in psychology, but they've got real specific meaning. And of course, we're going to go into this and understand and try and identify those states of mind, you know. So our job is to start to unpack and unravel this mind. Be your own therapist, as Lami actually puts it. And it's it's kind of a cliche, it's good marketing, but oh my goodness, it's utterly true. But it's the hardest job we'll ever do. That's the problem. The words are not complicated. So why is it hard? Several reasons. Well, first, our culture, with respect, not being rude about our scientific culture, is fantastic. But the actual philosophy we have, isn't it, is that we're made by someone else. Therefore, our problems come from someone else. Our view ourselves instinctively. When I'm, you know, if I'm angry with my boyfriend, what's your name again? Chuck. If I'm mad at Chuck, what's wrong, Robina? Why are you angry? Chuck did that. But the Buddha's view is that, you know, we can see, we all believe the outside world is the main source of our pain and the main source of our happiness. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, Chuck's so kind. So it's us deep in our bones, and this is what Buddha calls samsara, the faulty philosophy that really causes us to believe that the outside world is the main source of what goes on in here. Buddha literally reverses it. And these words are simple, but oh my goodness, to get in touch with this process is no easy thing. But that's the key to success, he says. What goes on in our mind is the source of any happiness and suffering we all have. This is actually what he's saying, literally, you know. But in the beginning, it just seems so bizarre to think this word, because it's clearly not our experience. So to reverse the process that we normally live according to, you know, and that's reinforced in our world. I mean, if I go to my therapist, I want to talk about my problems, we naturally look back into the past. What happened when I was young? What did my mummy do? What did my daddy do? What about my DNA, my genes, my chemicals? We look into all the external things because as far as we're concerned, I am the product of the outside world and the past. Whereas the Buddha's view says, fine, look into the past, look into the body, but the main thing is what goes on in my mind. And this is the part that's hard because everything in us wants to point the fingers out there. So it's immense effort and discipline and courage to take on board, even theoretically, this idea that my mind is this infinitely flexible thing, full of all these viewpoints and ideas that I can learn to become familiar with and then start to argue with the ridiculous, distorted, exaggerated, ego-based conceptual stories, and to unpack them and give them less power and then give more power to the virtuous, valid stories. That's one way of putting what being a Buddhist is. And it's the hardest job we'll ever do because everything in us wants to do the opposite. It's the outside world, you know. That's the major obstacle to our wanting even to look into our minds. But the other one is too, because as we know, because that's our culture, then we're not taught, are we, to pay attention in here until it's too late. From the second we wake up in the morning, isn't it, until the time we go to bed at night, where do we focus? By definition for us, life is out there, the objects of our five senses. We know we have a mind, we know we have thoughts and feelings, we know we have a deep unconscious, but we do not pay attention. And it's only when I want to kill Chuck that I realise something's going on in here, when it's all vomiting out my mouth, you know. Or, on the other hand, if haven't got an angry tendency, but if I've got a depressed tendency, I'll only know I'm depressed when I can't get out of bed one morning because I'm inert. So we wait till it's too late to pay attention to what happens in here. Buddha's skill is brilliant. He just says we've got to learn to pay attention as soon as we can because we can reconfigure this. Buddha's very practical. He says if you can change something, if I can get Chuck to behave nicely, wow, far out, Robina, go for it. But what if I can't? And we know from our experience in life, we can't make everything the way we want it. That's a fact. So Buddha simply says, well, you know what, baby? Change your mind instead. It's so easy and it's free. But it's the hardest job we'll ever do because we'd rather change the outside because that's the problem, you know. And we're addicted to that view. And Buddha says we've been practicing for countless lifetimes. So it's not, talk about unconscious. Buddha leaves Jung for dead, I tell you. So the major one is because we don't pay attention, and this is the trouble. We only pay attention when it's roaring to the surface as fierce emotion. In other words, we only pay attention to our mind when our body's involved. You think about it. When the body's shaking, when the tears are coming, when your heart's beating, then we notice, wow, something's going on in my mind. But it's been happening all the time, way deep down, and we come programmed, Buddha says, from the first second of conception with all our own past habits. Buddha looks into the past too, but not mummies and daddies, my own. That's the big point for the Buddha, you know. But it's a job we can all do, he says, and that's the source of happiness. It's the cause of our happiness. And then when we're really together with this one, a bird needs two wings, Buddha says, wisdom and compassion. This is the wisdom wing, all the nuts and bolts of putting yourself together so that then you're qualified to help others. Because we start to look around and we realise, oh my God, we're all in the same boat, you know. Compassion is the point, but it's not enough. As His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's the nuts and bolts of working on yourself. That's the first part of the practice. So that's the essence of Buddhism. The day-to-day job, the practical aspect. So as you're going to see, we're going to have do lots of prayers and stuff. And then we get very confused. Well, if there's no creator, who are you praying to? What's a prayer anyway? So let's just look at that briefly, you know. It's not that complicated. In some sense, it's exactly the same. For me, when I was a Catholic, little girl, in love with God, went to the Mass, learned all the Mass in Latin, wanted to be a priest, Mass 7 mornings a week at some point. Even though I was naughty, and I didn't see any contradiction. I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't. But it's in many ways just the same, in the sense that, you know, they use the term refuge in Buddhism. So Buddha's this regular guy, he's not a creator, he's an amazing person who's done this job of perfecting his own mind, he says, that's up, you know, we're taking it as a hypothesis. And he's basically saying, here's my methodology, over to you. So we know perfectly well in our life, if I want to learn to be a musician, a cook, anything, you need a person who's a teacher, who's done it already, who can show you. And you devote yourself to that person. You admire that person. You ask them to show you how to do it. That's what you're doing as a Buddhist. It's very simple. The difference is you don't see Buddha as your creator. He's a mentor. He's a person you want to become like. And we get that completely. If I want to learn music, I say, please show me music. I don't put my hands like that, but that's a prayer. Please help me. Please show me how to do it myself. That's the bottom line. So it's a lot of formal stuff. I mean, you know, these monasteries, they spend hours in their prayers and pujas and business like that. But there's a logic to it. And one takes on those things as and when one chooses to. Because basically you're referring to the Buddha as a person who's done the job that you're trying to do. So by accessing the Buddha and by doing practices, prayers, many of the prayers in Buddhism are like aspirations. Positive thinking, may I become a Buddha, may I help others, may all others be happy. There are lots of prayers like that. So they're kind of ways of connecting to your own mind, connecting to people who've done it already as an encouragement and an inspiration to help you achieve your goal. That's really the function. But like I said, you take these things on as and when you need. The bottom line, the essential job is what I said before. That's the bottom line. That's being a Buddhist. You can do your prayers and stuff till the cows come home, but if you're not doing this job, you're not being a Buddhist. This is the actual job. The other stuff helps you do it, that's all. That's the general idea. Okay, if there's no questions, we can go to bed. Any questions? Yeah, go.
Think about the media really blows things up to the point, you know, you're getting more distressed the more you hear the media.
With all the suffering of all the world being conveyed to us.
And just this person shooting all the Muslims innocently.
Yes.
And so it was interesting as you're watching the media playing out, saying it's going to be traumatising everybody like the earthquakes, which is creating a concept and people needing counselling. I think we're getting a lot of stimulation in the media that children cannot counteract. We're not getting the mind training.
Oh.
Mindfulness is coming in.
So what?
So the question is, how do we help wisely assist people through trauma when it's, you know, being wise and compassionate, saying, oh, no, I'm not suggesting people may not need counselling, but I sometimes think when there's a tragedy and it affects a lot of people and it's bigger than anything.
Well, that's the Buddhist view like we're talking, you've got to start with yourself.
Yeah.
So really the question is, how do I deal with trauma? How do I deal with seeing the suffering of the world? That's where the wisdom wing is really where you've got to put the nuts and bolts together. What is the world? What is karma? Why is it happening? What is the mind? What is this? It's really Buddha's nuts and bolts of why things happen, which is a major part of the Buddhist view. And that's a huge part. That is a major part. I mean, for Tibetans, who kind of have been full-blown Buddhists, taking on the full view from India from like the 7th century, and it's probably the only country now where country is hardly existing, but Tibetans in exile in their monasteries are the only ones who've really taken on all the Buddhist views from all the world, and where they're extant in these monasteries where they study it for 20, 30, 40 years. The entire world view of Buddhism, and that's what you study and learn in a very, depending on your own commitment to it, in the beginning, where you learn the nuts and bolts of Buddha's view of what is the world, what is suffering, and why does it happen. So people mightn't have the view of karma. It's a brand new idea to us, but we'll go into it with certainty. And, but in general, we can see, isn't it, we've got Christian teachings, why things happen. I'm talking about now why things happen, because that's a major part of dealing with the trauma. For example, if you're a really devoted Christian, we know, if you're a really devoted Muslim, you know that God runs the show, and God has a vision, God has a plan. And anybody and I would never criticise that view, it's not my view. But I remember in one of those flights that went down a couple of years ago, more than a couple, Air Asia, they were Malaysian, and Mummy and Daddy were asked, how do you think about the death of your daughter? She belongs to God. He has taken her back. Many of these Muslims in New Zealand are saying that. So, my point here is this. I might not agree with the creative view, but if people, that view, at least they've got an answer for something. They have faith in a creator. They believe he knows what's going on. He's got his plan. We don't know what the plan is, but we have faith. And look at the consequence. Their minds are happy. As one of them said, we have no resentment. We have no anger. You get an ordinary person who doesn't know why things are happening, who's got a typical materialist view, full of rage, full of despair, full of grief, full of trauma, because we don't know why things happen. So Buddha's got another view, it's called karma. Now that's up to us to take these views. But what I'm saying is, and it's often a surprise, that it's when we don't know why things are happening that we really go mad. And I think in our modern materialist world, with respect, even scientifically, we say no one knows why. And indeed, science hasn't yet found out why. Do you understand my point? So no wonder we have so much trauma, because we see it all, we don't know why it's happening, so much fear comes, and then we don't know what to do about it. But you talk to any Tibetan who has the view of karma in their bones since they're born, that's the view, and they learn it in the monasteries, so they've got it articulate. And that's the view that then they don't have shock. They're overwhelmed by suffering. Like one of my friends from here, 20 years ago, Jigdrol, he's in America now. He was telling me his story. He'd been born in the 70s, and then like in 87, there was the first mini uprising, like you must know, in Tibet against the Chinese. And it was all the young monks and nuns who were the radicals, all demonstrating, shouting and yelling, So naturally you think there must be lots of anger. But when he was telling me about this, he got arrested, then he got tortured, then he got released again, then he demonstrated again, then his friend had his head blown off, then he thought he'd better escape. So he came to Nepal, and he was telling me the story. And since he left, he was saying his brother got murdered, father got murdered, and he was sad. And I said to him casually, I said, Jigdrol, do you ever get angry? And he laughed. And he said, angry, what for? It's our own fault. Now those words are too shocking for us. All he meant was it's karma. We're going to go into karma. For us, it's just this weird hippie idea made up by the hippies in the 60s. It's an elaborate worldview that's been around for several thousand years, starting from the Hindus, that is really an elaborate explanation of what is suffering, what is happiness, and what are the causes. So it's quite fascinating. So Tibetans have this view in their bones, so they don't have anger. And you think what anger is, or fear, or panic. Why is this happening? Nobody knows why. They have a view. This is very shocking for us, And equally the same for those Muslims. They've got a view at least. Now, whether you agree is another discussion. Then there's less trauma. So I remember another story, I always quote this story, when I was based in the States running this liberation prison project, working with people in prison, and Richard Gere in 2003, he invited the Dalai Lama to teach there, and he also decided to work with a bunch of prisoners. So he invited about 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of Buddhism or meditation in prison. And then a couple of people like me were invited as well. And we participated in this all-day thing, 20 Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, Mexican, male, female, a whole cross-section of Americans who'd been in prison. All their traumas and the dramas and the suffering and the racism. I mean, in prisons, you know, America's like a nightmare with prisons. I'm allowed to criticise. I've got an American passport. It's all right. Anyway, he also invited these 2 young nuns, Tibetans, young women, who'd been tortured and sexually abused in Tibet for a couple of years. So they were telling their story, and I think it was very clear, if people wanted to quantify suffering, they probably had more than everybody else put together. But it was really evident to the Americans, who are like us Australians and English, who believe anger's good, you know, and all the trauma, the dramas, the rage, and why is this happening to me, and I don't deserve it, and who knows, blah, 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 blah. That's how we suffer so much. So they were quiet. They didn't have anger, you know. We don't trust that in the West. And then they said, there were tears, and one of them said, and of course, we have compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past and because we know they will suffer in the future for what they have done. That's the basis of compassion in Buddhism. The view of karma is the basis of compassion. But first you get it for yourself. And we're going to talk a lot about this because, I mean, I know when I first heard the teachings, like I said, I found that a missing piece in my life. I found karma a very powerful idea, you know. I mean, personally, some people don't even like it. That's okay. But I'm going to be talking about it. It's the Buddhist view, and it's part of the big deal, you know. And the point about it isn't, you know, oh, you mean I'm the blame, which is how we hear it. It means it's an explanation of why things happen, which then implies what you can do about it. Because once you've found the problem, and you can find the solution. And that's the approach very much in Buddhism. It's the method you use to interpret your life so that you can change. And then it doesn't bring, and that's the point that Buddhism says, when you have wisdom and clarity, you don't have fear, you know, there isn't trauma. So on the first level of practice, put yourself together. Then you can help your child. And if you know your child has got incredible depression or panic or fears, then you know how to deal with it. You know how much to expose them to. Some kids don't mind, some kids do. We've got to know their minds well. But the only way you can know their minds well is knowing your own mind well. That's fairly clear, isn't it? So always the wisdom has to come first, you know. Then we know how to help others. But it is a miracle that we're not all crazy. I mean, it's just everything's so naked now. The whole world is exposed in 1 million. I mean, even the worst nightmare of that New Zealand was, he actually did the whole thing on Facebook. I mean, it's like a living hell now, isn't it? That you can have actually, there he is with his camera. Everybody's seeing him shooting all these people live. I mean, it's beyond bizarre, the world now. It is beyond shocking. And how long was it before they even realized? I mean, no one's policing anything, is it? Absolutely beyond belief. Beyond astonishing. And there's nothing we can escape from now. And even the way we are personally, everybody exposes, like all these things on the television, all these, what are they called? What's the word? Reality shows. I mean, the more you expose of yourself, the more somehow, I mean, it's like there's nothing kept back anymore. Every fart, every maniac, every garbage, every junkie, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's such a fascinating world we live in. I mean, it's hard to stay, it's amazing we're not completely insane, isn't it? And how do you protect yourself from it? You know, you can go to the mountains, it's about the only one, isn't it? Turn your camera off. My God. Anyway, so let's just do a real simple meditation. I won't tell you much about it now. We'll just simply be real easy going, and just simply, we're going to do 3 minutes of focus, 3 minutes of concentration. So the job to be done, we're trying to do it, 3 minutes. The job, this is not a relaxation technique, big misunderstanding. It's not to make the thoughts go away. It's not to have a special vision. It's a really practical thing. It's like you're in a room of about 1,000 people, and the 1,000 people are your own thoughts, and you've made a decision not to make the thoughts go away. You made a decision, you're going to look at that spot on the wall. That's it. Well, all the 1,000 people in the room are all excited, all chatting away. But you're going to decide you're not going to pay attention. You're not going to ask them to go away. You're not going to wish they'd go away. You're not going to wish they'd shut up. You're just going to decide to use your own concentration power and decide, I'm going to look at that spot on the wall. That's the analogy. And the spot on the wall here is your own breath. So you're going to let your thoughts come and go. Who cares? You don't wish they'd go away. That's not the goal. You're training yourself to pay attention, to strengthen this ability to stay focused. That's what we're trying to do. It's really simple, you know. So just be very normal, very relaxed, have your body comfy, and just close your eyes and make a strong determination. I'm going to pay attention to that sensation of the air as it hits my nostrils, as I breathe in and out. That's it, okay? Now, the millisecond you start doing it, you're going to wander off. That's what happens. You bring your mind back to the breath. If you have to bring your attention back to the breath 50 times a minute, you've had a successful meditation. If you space out and then just space out and don't come back to the breath, you've missed the point. So you simply make a determination. I'm going to watch the breath. We're going to do it for like 3 quality minutes, okay? That's it. Pay attention to the sensation at the tip of your nose. Well, it's not quite the tip, is it? As it goes in, it's one sensation. As it goes out, it's slightly different. But you're paying attention to that sensation. That's it. Bring your mind back to the breath. Just the breath. Just train your attention to stay there. Wander off, bring it back. It's training. It's called training. It's practical. Don't think it's holy. It's not holy. So relax now, that's it. Just 3 minutes. I mean, we can see right now, much of it was just spacing out. That's what our mind does most of the time, you know. So to train the mind to focus, immediately if we develop it, you immediately start to be more conscious of what's happening in your mind. And that's what you do, you bring that to bear in your daily life. Normally in daily life, as I said, we only notice our mind when it's strong, when it's overwhelming. We have to learn to notice it before it gets to the emotional level. That's the real key to success. And we just need to practice, you know. And that's what we're going to be talking about, of course, how to do that. So we delight in our little bit of time together. The Buddha's view is that everything we hear and see and taste and touch and smell, it all gets imprinted in our mind. It's like taking photos all day, Rinpoche says, and you store them in your mind. It's one way they say in Buddhism. There's nothing we've ever experienced that is not stored in our mind. So we just be delighted this hour, you know, these thoughts we've had. We've also sown seeds. Every thought we have sows a seed. So we nourish these seeds from this moment forward with our efforts, so we can develop our marvelous potential, no matter how long it takes, to become this Sangye, Buddha, rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness, for our sake, for sure, and the sake of others. Changchob semchog rinpoche, ma kie panam ke gyuchig, kie pa nyampa me pa yang, gong ne gong du pa ba shok. So may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. That little prayer said. Okie doke. So do you want to do a meditation in the morning or forget it? What do you think? You don't have to. You're going to have an intense next 2 weeks, don't worry about it. You can relax tomorrow maybe. Or do you want to just a short one before breakfast? What do you think? If you'd like. Breakfast what time, Katie?
Breakfast
7:30 breakfast. You want to come here for half an hour in the morning, do a meditation? So then Katie can lead you in a meditation. Will you do that for us, Katie? Lead you in a few little different types of meditations, a little kind of taster, all right? In the 30 minutes, yeah? If you'd like. Yes? Okay.